Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, so in this video, I'd like to talk about narcissism and spirituality. Okay, in a way, I like to see narcissism kind of outside the context of psychology. I think psychology is kind of not a very spiritual sort of a way of describing the human mind, basically. And I do think the human mind is essentially, in part, I think the human mind is partly an artistic, a symbolic, but also a spiritual, phenomenon. I think the human mind is essentially, or the human phenomenology, I think, has spiritual aspects. That's just part of our nature, basically. And I think, we're also philosophical beings as well, and so I think that. Maybe what I see in psychology is maybe kind of a lack of emphasis, a lack of attention, maybe to some of the more philosophical and spiritual aspects of the mind and the phenomenology of the human mind. So I'd like to talk about narcissism from the point of view of spirituality. And of course, now, the way I look at spirituality, I try to abstract it a little bit from typical religious ideas or theologies. Okay. Um, when I think of spirituality, I think of it more as the phenomenon of spirituality. I'm not really that concerned. I'm not personally concerned of the truth of the matter of whether if I go up to the top of Mount Olympus, if I'm really going to find gods up there, or if Moses really came from Mount Sinai with the tablets written by some sky god or whatever. That to me is more the cartoonish aspect. I'm not really concerned about whether you can find Noah's Ark, or whether the universe was born from a bearded human-like creature who speaks English or Hebrew or whatever. I think that's kind of immature, and I think that I think there is mystery. If you think of the creation of the universe, if you think that every atom and every subatomic particle is literally alive in the sense that it's animated, it's tremendously animated. There's a tremendous amount of energy in every subatomic and atomic particle. So that energy, that energizing flow of time, and the creation of space and basically matter in the universe, I think to anybody who doesn't see that as miraculous, I think is maybe lacking a certain appreciation for what's really going on just in matter itself. And that's before we even get to something as staggeringly complex as, like, say, a single bacterium or a single plant cell. Phenomenally complex, and just even the very basic building blocks of physics. Just the basic subatomic elements, just how infused with energy these particles are, and we call them particles. We don't even really particles. These basic units of matter, basically. We call them particles because we just our vocabulary kind of runs out of effectiveness when you get so out there. But really, in a sense, I think the basic fundamentals of matter, the basic fundamentals of space and time. Time is like a flow. Literally, it's a flow. Like a washing. I think we're looking at miracles that are just overwhelming to even begin to comprehend, and in a sense, they're incomprehensible. And the idea that whatever reality is outside the universe, the universe may just be a pocket, in some broader existence that is just, how do you imagine the end of it, the beginning of it? I think we really reach a point where we start to contemplate the eternal. We start to contemplate, just being per se versus non-being. And then we just enter a world of just dizzying mystery. Okay. And so whoever doesn't swoon at the magnitude, is probably the same person that could go to the top of the mountain and see the horizons, from a gigantic mountaintop, and just maybe not give a shit and just chew their tobacco and just get in their pickup truck and drive. That kind of insensitivity. I mean, I think, I guess it's for, maybe there's a kind of a shut off where people just have a shut off to that, and they just don't want to be sensitive to that. I can remember as a young person, I remember I was very, very, very affected by people dying. Okay, like if I saw someone dying on a television show, it really affected me. And I remember there was a young classmate of mine in preschool who ended up dying, And when my mom told me about it, I was very affected, but I didn't want her to know that. Okay. And so I started discovering the I don't give a shit. Oh, it's not that big of a deal. Oh, whatever, you know. And I started learning how to be insensitive to very, very intimidating things. Except that I never achieved that when it came to like clouds, landscapes, big sky, mountaintop panoramas, even the majesty and the mystery and the wonder of just an insect, just how complex is a single insect or a single, you know, just a single flower or whatever. For whatever reason, I maintain the sensitivity. Um, and so it's hard for me to understand how you would apply that shut off, like that I don't give a shit, you know, that means nothing to me, to like a forest, you know. It's just a forest, whatever, you know. But that's we're capable of that, you know. And those are the kind of the shut offs that I think are part of that basic. If you watch maybe some other videos, I talked about narcissism as being kind of a shutdown of our ventilation to environmental content, basically the content of our larger environment. And we sort of learn to selectively start shutting and shutting. I know people, for example, like say farmers, you know, a lot of farmers, they love plants in the sense of cultivating them to sell or working the land. But if you ask a lot of farmers how much they care about forests and, you know, and rivers, some do, some don't. And some are just into their machines and they got their pickup trucks and their machinery, and it's just machinery and pickup trucks, and the actual nature is nothing to them. You know, how many snakes, you know, they kill snakes, whatever, just kill animals. Just kind of a lack of appreciation for nature. But then when it comes to like say their you know the land that they're you know developing, you know, the farming part of it, well, in that sense they care a lot, but it's because it's their business, you know. So it's kind of like selective appreciation kind of thing. And maybe a real technological bias, a real human bias, you know, human technology, human management of the land as opposed to the natural land, you know. So we kind of have these selective appreciations and also shut-offs, like, oh, I don't give a shit about that, or I care about this. And so I think you know, there are plenty of places in the world of spiritual appreciation where we can apply shut off, I don't give a shit, doesn't mean anything to me. And these things, you know, these are programs we've inherited. We don't invent these things. We don't go to like a we don't sit in a corner and just invent these things. I think we do sort of inherit these attitudes. And I think there's a long history in the human you know, in the human civilization of kind of getting engrossed in civilization itself, let's say in the farming and the technology, and then having a limited appreciation for the wilderness outside of the civilization, or let's say other civilizations or other cultures outside of our culture. And so you get these fundamental bigotries, which I think have spiritual dimensions to them, especially when we think of the appreciation for the broader panorama of creation. And so, you know, on that level, that's how I understand, you know, spirituality, or just different levels of appreciation on kind of an abstract level. Um, and also like specific spirits, like demons, spirits, individual spirits, you know, in the broader context of the spiritual setting, you can have individual spirits, individual demons, individual character types, archetypes, which are basically just different ways of saying spiritual incarnations. Um, and you know, you can describe them how you'd like to, but basically they're kind of abstractions that are more they're more generalized than a specific person, but you can see them in people. Okay, so a specific person is not an abstract archetype, but you can see an archetype in a person. Occasionally, an individual will become sort of an archetype, but in a sense, we sort of mythologize that person, and we sort of, in a way, we kind of delete their sort of human, you know, incoherencies and, you know, other aspects, you know. So when we, like, say you take someone like John F. Kennedy, if you look at him with a true microscope, and if you actually had to live with him during the time when he was alive, he was actually a person with a lot of flaws. He had back problems. He had health problems. He had to have special care from doctors to prevent him from having certain autoimmune or immune problems. I can't, or metabolic. He had some interesting diseases and some back problems, and he also was apparently a flagrant, you know, really pathological sex addict who just had to have sex all the time with all kinds of people. And you could say what you want, but definitely not the actual person that was John F. Kennedy. Maybe is not the archetype of John F. Kennedy that has sort of been elevated to a like an enshrined status. The enshrined John F. Kennedy is probably not the actual John F. Kennedy, but it is true that some people do become archetypal through kind of our enshrining mechanism. But as we do that, we kind of delete a little bit of their humanity and maybe overlook it. So I'm sure the same thing is true with Abraham Lincoln or whatever. Just name the person. But so in a sense, I think we all have sort of a spiritual language that we all understand, and one of the spiritual elements is the larger setting of creation itself, nature itself. Incarnated in the sense of wilderness on earth, but in the broader sense, like the heavens, subatomic particles, time itself, space, So you have like say the setting, and I think people who are sensitive to that and don't have like say either blinders or we don't sort of blinker ourselves to that the wonder and the mystery of it. I think that can even be almost overwhelming, because I think we are sort of as humans, we're sort of born to have a swooning appreciation to the magnitude, and the mystery of nature itself, creation itself, as to how it was created. I mean, we're all fools to even begin to wonder how it was created. It's just a mystery. And just being a mystery is by itself just the profoundness of it, and I think having a cartoon answer as to how it's created, I think is almost minimizes what a mystery it is and how staggering it really is. So the first level is kind of the setting, just the overall setting of just the wonder of the mystery of, the miracle of creation, and then within like say the setting of creation, you have nature as it is on earth, the seas, the rivers, the mountains, the deserts, the jungles, the forests, and really, if you really have full appreciation, if you're not blocked off from it somehow through some kind of acquired, inherited, lack of appreciation, or like some kind of wall or membrane that keeps you from appreciating, you can appreciate, just all the miracles, the little bugs, the insects, the amphibians, the salamanders, frogs, snakes, lizards, spiders, all of it in a way is miraculous, just phenomenally, just overwhelmingly miraculous, all these things. And there's really almost no limit to how much appreciation we can have for these things. And I can see how, in a way, it would be very natural for, oh gosh, native people, like Aboriginal people, to have almost like a reverence and a worship of animals as sort of spiritual incarnations, and they might even have animal forms to different spirits in their cosmovision, basically. And I've never had the ability to look at animals as being clearly spiritual, but I've marveled at just how amazing insects are and spiders. And I can even almost perceive the moods of a spider or an insect. I can tell, for whatever reason, I can see more happiness in spiders than I can in insects, but spiders have kind of a weird personality. And if you really are open to it, you can see almost like a dancing happiness to spiders when they're in different moods as they move about and stuff. And to me, it's kind of inspiring, and I've noticed also with just different animals, like even like birds or rodents, you become friendly with them, and you gain their trust, and you can even feed them. And you can see that almost like a mood of friendship forms, and you can see that they feel friendly and even playful. And if you really watch animals, they have the possibility of being playful. So I can see how, there would be, if we really open ourselves up, I can see how maybe our language of spiritual archetypes could somehow be understood through the vehicle of different animals. I personally don't think I have a very developed sensitivity to animals in that particular spiritual sense, but I think I can see the miracle of life in the animals, and also sort of a whole range of possibilities, how they can even be friendly or happy or playful. And so, it's kind of hard to understand, but I at least have some level of great respect for animals, and also a marvel ability to marvel at the miracle of animal life and even plant life. Just looking at just the miracle of just every plant, every flower. So it's really I don't know that I have such a developed sense of spirituality in animals and plant to have what the Aboriginal people will have, which would be almost a they can almost see like spirits in the animals. That to me is maybe a higher level that maybe I'm not even sensitive to, and I have to admit that. You know, but at least to understand that animals and plants are within the scope of our spirituality, and at the very least to have a great sensitivity and respect for the mystery and the miracle of nature in the world. The oceans, the ocean life, weather. Let's say the nature in terms of like clouds, storms, wind, cold, heat, humidity, whatever, deserts, forests. Really, I guess if we just open ourselves to it, it's just a staggering, majestic wonder. Just the whole panorama of human geography, human um, I'm sorry, world, earthly geography, geography on Earth and the nature on Earth. And so then we get into the world of people, and with people, what you do find very quickly is the importance of personalities. Okay. And now this is where I think we start to get into the realm of personality disorders, but it comes out of the realm of personality. And I think personality, in the fullest sense for humans, is a spiritual concept, or at least in part, at least partly, it's a spiritual concept, because I think we understand somehow kind of an alphabet. We understand sort of an alphabet, or a sort of a language of sort of an alphabet language of human spirituality as different archetypes incarnated in people. So when you see somebody who's being mean, even though that person might not always be mean, okay, you sort of for a second see them sort of inhabited by the archetype of the mean person. Okay. And we have to be very careful, because when you see someone acting a certain way, we have to be very careful whether we're seeing them as the archetype that we feel is inhabiting that person, or do we understand that that person has other dimensions, even though the other dimensions may not be very well expressed. But are we able to appreciate a person when they're maybe inhabited maybe too much, or over dominated by, let's say, a kind of let's say a narcissistic or psychopathic sort of a personality, to understand that may just be one large dimension of that person, but to also understand that the person might have other maybe dormant or less expressed dimensions. But it's important for us to understand that sometimes we tend to see people in terms of the archetypes that we're sort of born to see in people. So we're sort of born to recognize sort of an alphabet of archetypes, personality archetypes. And in a real person, you're never going to see the perfect archetype only inhabiting a person. You may see a person who largely expresses an archetype, but the fact that we're so prone to identify archetypes, we're so prone to see stereotypes in people, like say the mean drunk, or let's say the abusive father, or the sarcastic whatever, you know, when we see that heavily expressed in a person, it's going to be hard for us to kind of notice the other aspects of their existence, because we're so prone to see things in terms of personality. Okay, so I think, and if I had to say anything about personality, I think it's our tendency to perceive sort of the character of people through our pre-programmed, sort of pre-understood alphabet and syntax of archetypal presentations. So for whatever, the benevolent king, the tyrant king, the just all the different things, like the swindler, the con artist, whatever. I mean, these are basically, they're like phenotypes. They're sort of archetypes. But in reality, actual people don't really have only one archetype. Okay, or even though one archetype might be heavily expressed in people, generally individuals have other potentials or other aspects, but we sort of don't see them because we tend to want to see things in terms of archetypal simplicity. So we have to be kind of sensitive not to be blinded by our own spiritual syntax, so that we do remain conscious that people are not necessarily the spiritual stereotype that we almost want to process them as being just one stereotype. So it's like we sort of look at people through a lens of spiritual stereotyping. And so the idea is that we have to kind of recognize that we have that lens and that tendency to see people through a spiritual stereotype, and to learn to understand the spiritual stereotype and accept that, but also to try to see through that and to see the actual person who may be messier and maybe not so coherent or congruous with that particular spiritual stereotype. So basically, I think of the stereotypes themselves as occupying like an abstract realm, because no particular human actually embodies fully any stereotypes. So the stereotypes are really abstractions as part of our spiritual language, our spiritual syntax. Okay, and those abstractions are kind of like the gods of Mount Olympus. You have all these different gods. Basically, it's in a way, it's sort of our polytheism is built into us. Basically, the catalog of character types. When you look at the DSM, you see that the paranoid personality, you see the histrionic personality. In a way, that there is no person who fully meets all those criteria precisely, or that only has those criteria. In other words, someone might have all the histrionic criteria, but they also have other aspects. Nobody is completely the same as the abstract stereotype. So in a sense, even the DSM presents sort of a kind of a gallery, sort of a catalog of stereotypes, and so, or let's say a good fiction writer or someone who loves television. As you watch enough television, you see different types of characters. You see different mafia characters. You see different, like say, neighborhood characters, like say the good mother, the dysfunctional mother, the alcoholic father, the responsible father, the mafioso, different mafia, like the top mafia, like Godfather type, the soldiers, low life criminals, just different, all these different character types. Basically, these are like fictional stereotypes. Okay, that is part of our spiritual language, to see different. Basically, they're almost like demons. They're like different sort of combinations of personality characteristics crystallized into different spiritual types. And we sort of have a sense of those types. Oh, he's, and it even comes into our language. We'll say, oh, he's just a loser, drug addict, homeless. And when we say homeless drug addict, we start crystallizing almost like these stereotypical characters. And I think even as we get into like racism, we start like simplifying our idea of like people from Asia, or like say South Asia, or Africa, or whatever. And we have to be careful, because it's our natural language to sort of crystallize different personality types or different character types sort of through our catalog of, let's say, spiritual types, archetypes, stereotypes. So that to me is a spiritual language. I guess the way I look at narcissism, there's different ways to look at narcissism, and I've talked about different ways that I look at it. But one possible other way of looking at narcissism might be where you fall too much into the world, let's say, of that catalog of stereotypes. Okay, where that becomes sort of like your universe. Okay, and you sort of block your appreciation for the broader context and the broader setting of creation itself, which is another spiritual aspect. Okay, and maybe you get so kind of embedded into the world of, like, say, just the character archetypes, basically, that becomes your universe, and you become desensitized to the broader space, and I mean the broader setting, the setting of creation, the setting of nature. And so you become limited in your spirituality and your spiritual sensitivity, so that what's big to you becomes the whole universe to you is just the character space. And then specifically, you might have, like, say, such a preference for certain characters that you sort of get into sort of a preferential orbit within the character catalog of just like a sub catalog of like your favorite types of character, and those are like preferential, and then you have a bad attitude towards the rest. So you lack the perspective to just see all the characters as they are and just have them sort of equally appreciated, And so basically, narcissism, you could almost see it spiritually as sort of a collapsing into certain parts of the spiritual catalog and the spiritual, let's say, setting, where you're so embedded, let's say, in the character section, and then and then even within the character section, like say maybe in some subgroups of the character world, where you just have like say your preferred characters and maybe others, and so you're like too embedded in the character world basically. And so that as you think of yourself, you can't think of yourself with perspective to see that an individual is not really the same thing as the stereotypes that we have in our spiritual catalog. Okay, and because you don't have that perspective, you start to mistakenly actually identify with stereotypes in the spiritual catalog. Okay, and you mistakenly identify yourself with like say your favorite stereotype, or what you think might be a really cool stereotype, and so then you enter into a world where you're in distortion, where you're not really congruent with the larger reality, because you have a mistaken identification with things that are not actually people. Okay, they're actually spiritual archetypes, spiritual stereotypes. And now, if you understand them as stereotypes with the perspective that they actually exist in, okay, well, that's just orientation, okay, and that's just being oriented. That's understanding. But when you don't have the perspective and you just fall into just the world of characters and maybe a subgroup within the world of characters, well, you've lost your perspective. And you're going to mistakenly identify with things that aren't even people, and you're going to have a mistaken navigation of your own spiritual elements. You're going to have a mistaken orientation within your own spiritual phenomenology. Okay, so all of us have in our mind, in the phenomenology of our minds, we have sort of a spiritual kind of a spiritual orientation. Okay, but it only makes sense for us if we have it with perspective. And I think the perspective really gets set up through our appreciation of the broadest space, the broadest setting of creation itself, the universe, the mysteries of creation in the universe itself, the cosmic. Okay, and then the next level would be the earthly nature, the oceans, the heavens, the skies, the clouds, the forests, the deserts, the rivers, basically the landscape, the panoramas, the great panoramas. And to have in that priority, so you have the cosmic, and then you have the panoramic, and then you have, maybe human. Well, I guess in the panoramic, we have to make sure we emphasize nature, right? But then within the panoramic and nature, then we have, like, say, the human. Okay, and within the human, we see it with perspective. We don't get too closed up into it. I think we already become a little bit narcissistic when we get too involved just in the human, okay, because that takes away that distance perspective to see things in their place, so that we can see, let's say, the character section, the character part of the spiritual, the spiritual syntax. Basically, the character section is just a small section, and it deserves to be seen in its perspective. But when the character section becomes too big for us, and we fall into that, okay, then we make the mistake of maybe getting the preferences within the character section, and then us identifying with characters mistakenly, when a human being is not a character. But we have to have distance to see that. So basically, the spiritual enlightenment that comes out of that is that as human beings, we are not, with perspective, we can see that we are not archetypes. We are not character types. We identify with them, but we are just imperfect, messy, chaotic individuals in a setting, you see, where those are just, that's just our language of identification of people. That's like a lens, through which we identify people. Sort of like, say, the set and body of, like, say, spiritual archetypes, character types, but we don't confuse ourselves with those things, and we have distance and perspective, not to get too, let's say, enthralled by any particular personality type, not to be too impressed by any particular personality type. But it's exactly that perspective, I think, that's missing in narcissism and other personality disorders. So in that sense, you could see it as let's say, a spiritual disorder. Okay, and obviously getting better would involve developing spiritual perspective. So anyway, really appreciate that, and thanks for watching.